Julio Iglesias in the Middle East. How he became the king of Arab hearts. The desert wind carried more than sand that evening in 1977. As Julio Iglesias stepped off the plane in Beirut, he had no idea he was about to become something unprecedented in the Middle East, a Western artist who would transcend politics, religion, and ancient cultural barriers to become the voice of an entire region's heart. This is the story of how a Spanish crooner conquered the Arab world, not with armies or oil deals, but with melodies that spoke to the deepest yearnings of the human soul. It is a tale of cultural bridges built across seemingly impossible divides, of music becoming diplomacy, and of one man's voice uniting hearts that governments could never bring together. It began with a misunderstanding. Julio's management had booked what they thought was a simple European tour extension, a few concerts in Lebanon, perhaps Egypt. They didn't understand the complex web of Middle Eastern politics, the ancient grudges, or the unspoken rules that governed cultural exchange in a region perpetually on the edge of conflict. But sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the most innocent steps. When Julio arrived in Beirut in March 1977, the city was still reeling from civil war. Buildings bore the scars of rocket attacks. Streets that had once bustled with cosmopolitan energy now echoed with the hollow sound of survival. The last thing anyone expected was for a Spanish singer to waltz into this powder keg and somehow make everyone forget their differences. The first concert was planned for a modest venue, maybe 2,000 seats, but word spread through the city like wildfire. This wasn't just any Western performer. This was Julio Iglesias, the man whose voice could make women weep in 17 languages. By showtime, crowds had gathered outside that exceeded the capacity of most stadiums. I had never seen anything like it, recalls Lebanese promoter Mahmoud Zain. People were crying just hearing his name. Women were fainting. Men, hard men who had survived years of war, were openly emotional. It was as if he represented something they had lost and desperately wanted to find again. That first performance in Beirut was transformative, not just for the audience, but for Julio himself. As he looked out at faces weathered by conflict, eyes that had seen too much sorrow, he understood that he wasn't just performing. He was healing. His voice, trained in the romantic traditions of Spain but somehow universal in its appeal, found resonances in Arab hearts that neither he nor they had expected. When he sang Gwendolyn, the audience didn't hear English or Spanish. They heard the sound of love itself, translated into emotions that transcended language. But it was when he attempted his first words in Arabic, broken, tentative, but sincere, that something magical happened. The crowd fell silent, then erupted in an ovation that lasted 17 minutes. He had tried to say, "I love you, Lebanon," and though his pronunciation was imperfect, his intention was pure. In that moment, Julio would later reflect, "I realized that music isn't just about entertainment. It's about connection. It's about reminding people that beneath all our differences, we share the same hopes, the same capacity for joy, the same need for love." News of Julio's Lebanese triumph spread across the Middle East with the speed of desert winds. From Cairo to Kuwait, from Damascus to Dubai, Arabic radio stations began playing his music. But more importantly, they began playing Arabic versions of his songs, translations that maintained the emotional core while adapting to local cultural sensibilities. Egyptian composer Baligh Hamdi was the first to recognize Julio's potential in the Arab world. Working in secret, he created Arabic adaptations of Julio's greatest hits, transforming Spanish romanticism into Middle Eastern emotional landscapes. Gwendolyn became Habibti, my love. Un Canto a Galicia became a tribute to the beauty of the Nile. But Hamdi did something even more remarkable. He convinced Julio to learn these Arabic versions phonetically, to sing them with the same emotional intensity he brought to his Spanish originals. The result was unprecedented. A Western artist performing in Arabic with such authenticity that native speakers forgot he was foreign. The recordings, when they were finally released across the Arab world, caused a sensation. Record stores couldn't keep them in stock. Radio stations played them so frequently that other artists complained about the lack of airtime. Julio Iglesias had become the first Western artist to achieve genuine local success in the Arab world on Arabic terms. Not everyone was pleased with Julio's growing influence. Conservative religious leaders in several countries denounced his music as corrupting Western influence. His romantic ballads, they argued, promoted inappropriate relationships between men and women. His stage presence was too sensual for traditional Islamic values. But something unexpected happened. Instead of driving audiences away, these criticisms only increased Julio's mystique. Young Arabs, especially women, saw in him a symbol of the romantic freedom they craved, but couldn't openly express. His concerts became acts of quiet rebellion, celebrations of emotional liberation in societies that often suppressed such feelings. The controversy reached its peak in 1979 when religious authorities in Saudi Arabia attempted to ban his concerts. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Tens of thousands of fans petitioned the government. Prominent businessmen threatened to boycott events that excluded Julio, and even some moderate clerics argued that his music promoted love and family values rather than corruption. The Saudi government, recognizing both the economic and social pressure, reached a compromise that would define Julio's Middle Eastern career. He could perform, but only in venues that maintained cultural sensitivity, and his shows would include tributes to Arab culture and values. By 1980, Julio had become something no one could have predicted, an unofficial cultural ambassador to the Arab world. His concerts were attended not just by music fans but by government officials, diplomats, and business leaders. He was performing a kind of soft diplomacy that formal political channels couldn't achieve. The most remarkable example came in 1982, during the height of the Iran-Iraq War. Both countries were seeking international support for their positions, but Julio received invitations to perform in both Baghdad and Tehran. Most artists would have chosen sides or declined entirely. Julio chose a third path. He agreed to perform in both countries, but only if he could dedicate each concert to peace between the two nations. His Baghdad concert included prayers for Iraqi soldiers and their families. His Tehran concert featured tributes to Persian culture and hopes for regional stability. Neither government was entirely happy with his approach, but neither could afford to alienate someone who had become genuinely beloved by their populations. Julio's concerts became rare, neutral ground in a region polarized by conflict. Living and performing in the Middle East changed Julio in profound ways. The Spanish crooner who had arrived in Beirut in 1977 was sophisticated but somewhat superficial, focused primarily on romantic conquest and commercial success. The man who emerged from decades of Middle Eastern tours was deeper, more reflective, genuinely moved by the suffering and resilience he had witnessed. He began incorporating Middle Eastern musical elements into his global repertoire, not as exotic additions, but as integral parts of his artistic expression. Oud melodies appeared in his Spanish songs. Arabic rhythms influenced his Latin arrangements. He was becoming a truly international artist, not just a Western one performing internationally. More importantly, he began using his platform to advocate for Middle Eastern causes that transcended politics. He supported programs that brought medical care to war zones. He funded cultural exchanges that brought Arab students to European universities. "The Middle East taught me that being successful means more than selling records," he explained to a journalist in 1985. "It means using your voice, literally and figuratively, to make people's lives better." By the mid-1980s, Julio's Middle Eastern tours had become economic events in themselves. His concerts generated millions of dollars in local revenue, filled hotels, packed restaurants, and created temporary employment for thousands of people. In Kuwait, his 1984 concert series was credited with boosting tourism revenue by 300% that quarter. In Egypt, his performances at the foot of the pyramids became annual events that drew visitors from across the region. The Lebanese government declared his return concerts national cultural events that helped rebuild the country's reputation as a cultural center. But the real economic impact was in record sales. By 1988, Julio Iglesias was the best-selling international artist in the Arab world, outselling not just other Western performers, but many local stars as well. His Arabic-language recordings became the standard by which other cross-cultural attempts were measured. Record industry analysts estimated that Julio's Middle Eastern success generated over $200 million in revenue during the 1980s alone. making him not just a cultural ambassador, but a significant economic force in the region. Perhaps Julio's most remarkable achievement in the Arab world was his ability to bridge generational divides. Older Arabs appreciated his respect for traditional values and his sophisticated musical approach. Younger generations embraced him as a symbol of international connection and romantic possibility. His concerts became family events where grandparents, parents, and children could share emotional experiences. In a region often divided by age-related cultural conflicts, Julio provided common ground. His music spoke to universal human experiences, love, loss, hope, family, that transcended generational boundaries. This bridging effect extended beyond individual families to entire societies. His popularity helped normalize Western cultural influence in ways that political or economic pressure couldn't achieve. He made it acceptable, even desirable for Arab audiences to appreciate international artistry while maintaining their own cultural identities. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Julio navigated Middle Eastern politics with remarkable skill. He performed in countries that were enemies of each other, maintained friendships with leaders across the political spectrum, and somehow avoided being captured by any single political narrative. His secret was consistency. He always presented himself as an artist, not a politician. He sang about love, not ideology. He celebrated culture, not governments. When pressed for political opinions, he invariably redirected conversations toward music, family, and shared human values. This approach allowed him to maintain relationships that would have been impossible for openly political figures. He was welcomed in both Israel and Arab nations, in revolutionary Iran and conservative Gulf states, in secular Egypt and religious Saudi Arabia. His success proved that cultural diplomacy could achieve things that formal political channels couldn't, building personal relationships across political divides, creating emotional connections that transcended ideology, and demonstrating that different cultures could appreciate and celebrate each other without losing their distinct identities. Today, when music industry analysts study successful cultural crossovers, Julio's Middle Eastern career remains the gold standard. He didn't just perform in the region, he became part of it. He didn't impose Spanish or Western musical values, he learned to blend them with local traditions in ways that honored both. His influence can be heard in the work of contemporary Arab artists, who incorporate international elements into traditional music. His approach to cross-cultural respect influenced how later Western artists approached Middle Eastern markets. His success demonstrated that authentic cultural exchange could be commercially successful while remaining artistically honest. But perhaps his greatest legacy is the generation of Middle Easterners who learned through his example that loving their own culture didn't require rejecting others, and that appreciating international artistry didn't diminish their local identity. How did a Spanish singer achieve something that diplomats, politicians, and business leaders had consistently failed to accomplish? How did he build genuine affection across religious, political, and cultural boundaries that had resisted every other form of bridge building? The answer lies not in strategy or calculation, but in authenticity. Julio approached the Middle East not as a market to be conquered, but as a culture to be appreciated. He learned Arabic not to exploit local audiences, but to communicate with them more genuinely. He adapted his music not to pander, but to participate in a larger musical conversation. His success in the Arab world proves that cultural barriers, however ancient and seemingly insurmountable, dissolve in the presence of genuine respect and authentic artistry. He demonstrated that one voice, if it sings with sincerity, can reach across any divide and touch hearts that politics have declared unreachable. Even today, decades after his peak Middle Eastern touring years, Julio Iglesias remains beloved throughout the Arab world. His songs play at weddings, his voice provides comfort during difficult times, and his example continues to inspire both artists and audiences. Young Arab musicians still cite him as proof that international success doesn't require abandoning cultural identity. Western artists studying cross-cultural appeal still analyze his Middle Eastern approach. Diplomats and cultural ministers still reference his career when discussing soft power and cultural exchange. but perhaps the most meaningful measure of his impact is simpler and more human. In coffee shops from Casablanca to Baghdad, his music still brings smiles to faces weathered by decades of regional conflict. His voice still reminds listeners that love, hope, and joy transcend every boundary humans create. Julio Iglesias didn't conquer the Middle East. He embraced it. And in return, the Middle East embraced him back, making him forever part of its musical soul. In a region often defined by division, he became a symbol of what connection could accomplish when approached with sincerity, respect, and an open heart. His story proves that the most powerful bridges between cultures are built not by governments or corporations, but by individuals willing to sing honestly about the experiences that unite all humanity.